It's hard to think of many people who have dominated the global conversation quite like Donald Trump. But how does a single, publicly edited source like Wikipedia tell his story? Well, today, we're going to distill the huge Dutch Wikipedia article about his life and career. Our whole goal here is just to see what kind of impartial story emerges when you look at him through this one very specific lens. And that leads to a really interesting question, right? How do you tell the story of someone so polarizing using just one source? We're not just going to list off a bunch of facts. Instead, we're going to look at the story that's built from those facts, the key moments, the controversies, and the big transformations, all laid out in this massive, publicly edited article. So the way the Wikipedia article lays it all out, it's kind of like a three-act play. And we're going to follow that same structure. We'll start with his beginnings as a businessman, move into his time as president, and then get to where he is now as a political contender. Okay, let's dive in. So Act 1 of Trump's public life, according to the source, isn't about politics at all. It's all about him being this high-profile developer and, of course, a media personality. This is the period that really built the brand that would later define his whole political career. And this timeline, it really shows you how that public image was built, step by step. The source points to these key projects: turning around a failing apartment complex for a big profit, pulling off the Woolman rink renovation when the city couldn't, and making that savvy purchase of Mar-a-Lago. And then, of course, the whole thing just explodes in 2003 with The Apprentice, which pretty much cemented that image of the ultimate deal maker for millions of people. Now, this is a key point the article makes. Trump himself has never declared personal bankruptcy, but his companies, they filed for it 6 times. And the article includes this quote to really frame his perspective on it. The idea that these weren't failures, they were just strategic business moves, using the system exactly how it was designed. And this right here, this gets to a theme you see again and again in the source material. Just how much was he actually worth? I mean, look at this. Right before he launches his presidential campaign, Forbes puts his net worth at $4.1 billion. But his own statement claims more than double that, with a massive $3.3 billion of it coming from the value of the Trump brand itself. All right, so now we get to Act 2. This is where the businessman makes a hard pivot into politics. He takes that public outsider persona and just channels it into this disruptive political force. And the source really marks his 2015 campaign announcement as the huge turning point. And you can't talk about this chapter without talking about this slogan. According to the article, "Make America Great Again" wasn't just some catchy campaign line. It literally became his political identity. He used it constantly on Twitter, at rallies. It summed up his whole populist, nationalist message in just 4 words. The article also points out just how confrontational the campaign's relationship with the media was, and that it was on purpose. It includes this pretty blunt quote attributed to his campaign chief, Steve Bannon, which describes a strategy of just overwhelming the press with a constant fire hose of new information and controversy. The idea was to make it almost impossible for any one story to stick. So after that 2016 victory, we enter what the article pretty much calls a presidency of disruption. The story here shifts to focus on how his administration just broke with tradition, both in the policies it pushed and in the way it communicated. And the source lays out a bunch of these signature policies that really defined his time in office. A lot of them were about shaking things up. You see the controversial entry ban, the big push for a border wall, and these major foreign policy shifts, like recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and helping broker the Abraham Accords. And of course, he delivered on his promise to pull the US out of the Paris Climate Agreement. But it wasn't just about policy, right? The article spends a lot of time on how he communicated as president. It describes a style that totally bypassed the usual channels and really changed the fundamental relationship between the White House and the press. And that is a huge theme here, this whole direct-to-the-public thing. His personal Twitter account was often the first place you'd see official presidential statements. He constantly branded reporting he didn't like as fake news, and even called some news organizations the enemy of the American people, a statement so potent, the source points out, that the US Senate unanimously passed a resolution just to push back on it. And that brings us to the final act documented in the article. And wow, it's all about conflict. It covers the biggest challenges of his presidency, the chaotic aftermath of the 2020 election, and his return as a political contender, all while facing a mountain of legal battles. For example, the article breaks down the 2 historic impeachment proceedings he faced. The first one, back in 2019, was all about his dealings with Ukraine.
The second came in 2021, right after the storming of the U.S. Capitol. And in both cases, as the source records, he was impeached by the House, but then ultimately acquitted by the Senate.
Now, the time right after the 2020 election, that's framed as a really pivotal chapter. The article runs through his refusal to concede the election, the various legal challenges that were thrown out by the courts one after another, and how it all led up to January 6, 2021, and the storming of the Capitol by his supporters. Okay, so this table kind of pulls together all the different legal challenges he's been facing since he left office, at least according to the source, and they are all over the map. From state-level indictments in New York and Georgia to federal indictments from the special counsel. And the source, of course, notes the historic outcome in that New York case, where on May 30th, 2024, he became the very first former U.S. president to be convicted in a criminal case. So when you step back and look at it all, from real estate mogul to reality TV star, from political disruptor to a former president facing all these unprecedented legal challenges, the story laid out in the Wikipedia article is one of constant, dramatic transformation. The narrative it presents is, well, clearly still being written. And the question it kind of leaves you with is simple. Based on this documented history, what on earth will the next chapter hold?